So right before we went live, Commissioner Gresham, I believe you were saying something.
It is delightful to be here. Adam Gresham, Commissioner of Finance and Management.
And Hardy Merrill, Deputy Commissioner of Finance and Management.
Thank you. And so we invited you in here today because we have been having a number of conversations about fees. We've been going through a few different offices fees, been having conversations with the Transportation Committee about the state of the Transportation Fund. You know that we made a data request to you in last year's budget about the fee inventory and just wanted to sort of talk all of that through a little bit.
Sure. Well, I would say that you have here in front of you the fee department of Finance and Management of the Agency of Administration. It's a little awkward in that with taxes, revenues, you got a whole department of taxes. We have no department of fees. So we are the folks who receive and collate and review fee requests from our agencies and departments. You'll note that within our budget instructions, there's a section where we...
And that's up on our website?
Yes. There's a section there. If you go to page 10, I believe, of the document 11 of the PDF, you'll see there's a section there where we instruct departments and agencies what to do. But I thought for the purposes of kind of explaining how we go about what we do, there's really two components to it. There's the statutory guidelines, which for obvious reasons we adhere to very carefully. And then more of the policy guidelines that we submit within the budget instructions. And so I thought with the chair's permission, I would yield to my statutory guidelines expert. And we can go over that first, because that really kind of drives what we do at first. So.
Sure. I'd love to hear what you think about the statutory guidelines on fees.
Sure. So I'm going to just summarize a little bit from the Title 32 VSA 605 is where I'll start. Subchapter 6 is the section that covers executive and judicial branch fees. So in 605, the title is Consolidated Executive Branch Annual Fee Report and Request. So, it's first established that the governor shall submit with the, it'll accompany the annual budget report that's delivered on the third Tuesday in January, that the fee report and request shall accompany the budget. And the fee report is defined as a report covering all fees in existence on the prior July 1 within certain areas of government. And this is, I'm not sure if you've done any review yet, or a review would be worthwhile for you to provide of the 3-year cycle. All fees in government are divided into, 3 different sections. And so for instance, this year, we would have been on cycle to report on all fees that are identified by the Department of Finance and Management Accounting System as pertaining to the functional areas of general government, labor, general education, commerce and community development, and transportation. So this year, we would have provided a fee report just covering those fees specific to those departments. However, since, as you mentioned, there were some special fee reports required of our department by 2022 Act 185, Section E106, one of those included an inventory of all fees across all functional areas. So, and that was actually due November 15th to the Joint Fiscal Committee. So we really provided, instead of just the 1/3 of government fees that were required to be on cycle, we did that fee report exercise reporting the same kinds of information that are specified in the annual fee report for all fees across government, and that was referred to as a fee inventory.
And I have questions about the fee inventory, but I guess I'm wondering sort of within that statutory requirement of the 3-year cycle.
Yes.
Where you all perceive the gap between the gap, the budget gap that would be sort of filled by fees increasing and the gap of you not asking for that fee increase in those, at that 3-year cycle.
Okay, so, well, I guess,
For the statutory requirement of the request that's connected to the report,
sure.
how would you characterize its
Well,
absence?
In reading, so in the same statute, I just covered the definition of fee reports and the information to be included in the fee report that's made, third Tuesday of each year along with the governor's request. It also defines, the next subsection D defines a fee request and defines the criteria that should be utilized if a fee request is to be made. However, we're not reading the statute as requiring a fee request to be made. And in fact, we are not making a fee request this year. A fee request was provided in January 2022. It's kind of interesting, and not to go too far down the weedy rabbit hole of fees, but there are actually, in 2022, the fee request information that was provided was pertaining to Forest Parks and Recreation. And they're actually a unique case because their fees are not set by the fee bill. And they actually have statute within the Natural Resources title that notwithstands these aspects of statute that we're talking about right now, and authorizes the commissioner of FPR to set fees by rulemaking. However, it also states in that language, and I'm not sure I have the site right in front of me, but it does require, however, in that statute, which is in the Natural Resources title, that it does not exempt, the FPR is not exempted from 605, the 605 reporting requirement, which is what I'm discussing right now. So we did in fact include the request to increase fees, even though they would be done via rulemaking and not by statute. They were included in the fee request that was submitted with the fee report in 2022. Now in 2023, we provided fee report information, not just for the departments that would be on cycle, but for the entire universe of fees. However, we are not making a request for any fee changes in this year in terms of a consolidated fee request.
So the distinction really is we view this as every year we provide you a fee report, but every year we don't necessarily provide you a fee request. So this year we did not provide a fee request. Last year we did. I think in 2019 we did. So, it's based on need. So that's how we read the requirement.
And I'd add one other sort of technical point is, although we provided a fee request requesting an increase in fees pertaining to Forest Parks and Recreation, like they were not on cycle that year. They were in fact on cycle for fee report in the prior year, and a request was not made. So you can make, I guess the way we understand it is you can make a fee request can be made by any department in any year. They can respond to our budget instructions and make a request for a fee increase. As far as the fee report that we're required to provide, it's typically only every 3 years for departments on site.
And how often does a department make a fee request that is then passed on into us? And then Representative Sims and Representative Maslin.
So as part of our budget process, you see in our budget instructions, we send to agencies and departments every year. They know that the time to make a request would be when they submit their budgets. And when we get our budgets submissions, we get all kinds of requests, not just fee. We get requests for policy changes. We get requests for new money. We get requests for less money, rarely, but sometimes. So the fee requests would be within those, and we get them. We get them.
That's it.
So I guess I'm curious, given the long list of the number of programs where fees do not cover the cost of providing the service or regulatory function. And I frankly felt some of those deficits were rather staggeringly large in size. I'd like to better understand your definition of a need to make a request to increase fees. I hear you saying it's really up to you to determine whether there's a need. And it seems to me like there are very significant deficits and gaps. So help me understand what a need for an increased fee is from your perspective.
So there's statute and there's policy, and we'll get to the statute, and then I can go into how we review them policy-wise, if that's suitable.
I just, on that topic, in terms of the fund deficits, the largest fund deficit that was reported was in Secretary of State Office of Professional Regulation, for example, and they have not in the past 4 years responded to us with fee request information. So they have not been included. They have actually gone directly to the legislature at times, but that's one example where out of the several programs that were defined as programs where fees do not cover the cost of providing the service or regulatory function, the one, and you mentioned large deficits, well, the one with the largest deficit, we actually didn't receive a response. So we didn't include a request pertaining to that because it simply wasn't received. So
Statutorily, we determine. Do you want to go over what?
Sure. I get back into sort of where I was starting with the statutory review. When we receive a request, the same section 605, which describes what a fee request shall contain, it's fairly specific in terms of first defining a fee request as any proposal to create a new fee or change, reauthorize, or terminate an existing fee, or set a new or adjust an existing fee rate or amount. And each new or adjusted fee rate shall be accompanied by information justifying the rate. And so this is really where we perceive our statutory responsibility to include evaluating the request according to this criteria, which the very first listed being the relationship between the revenue to be raised by the fee or change in the fee and the cost, or change in the cost of the service, product, or regulatory function supported by the fee, with costs construed pursuant to subdivision 603(2) of this title. And if you
You shared that with us, what you're reading from right now?
well, these are from.
I mean, I know that we have the green books right behind us.
Okay.
but we don't have enough copies of the green books to go around, so I just want to send that over.
Sure.
Thank you. Appreciate it. You don't have to do it
Like
right now.
electronically right now? I'll
Not
absolutely
right now,
send you my
just
notes.
afterwards would be great.
Okay. Absolutely shall do so. And so, and then, so flipping ahead to that 603 sub 2 that's referred to, there is described in that section, which is fee creation amount and adjustment of amount is the title of that section. That it's stated that the rate or amount of or adjustment to any fee shall be set by act of the General Assembly, and it could, or the Joint Fiscal Committee. And there's a little bit of, technical language as to when it would go to the Joint Fiscal as opposed to the Assembly. But the criteria that's put forth in 603 sub 2 is if projected revenues as demonstrated by the agency head proposing the adjustment are reasonably related to the cost of providing the associated service or product or performing the regulatory function. Cost shall be narrowly construed, but may include reasonable and directly related costs of administration, maintenance, and other expenses due to providing the service or product or performing the regulatory function. So I guess to kind of summarize, we find apparent in statute, a clear requirement that the fee amount should be tied to the cost. And so it shouldn't be, for instance, we're just going to set a fee to charge what the market can bear, for instance. And so we are, finding our statutory responsibility to ensure that there is a direct connection between the cost and that can be demonstrable and the fee, and that would be part of the information that we would provide.
So to follow up on Representative Sims' question, when you receive fee requests from departments, I don't know how many of those you're, sending on to us, but as you're narrowing that list, what is the criteria you use to narrow that list on whether or not to pass them on to us? Is it that statute specifically?
Not solely.
No. So we start with that. So every department knows that they've got to connect their program or their fee request to a program and the cost of that program.
Absolutely.
And we take that seriously. So to that, we ask departments, and you'll see this in the budget instructions, to fill out a couple of additional questions. We ask what programs or services have changed because you haven't raised charges. In other words, has this had an impact on what you're doing on a daily basis? Is there a program that you're running that is now not running correctly or that you've had to curtail? Or are you still able to offer the same programs and services? And that's in the same light. Is there, without extra revenue, does that mean there's a change in what you're offering in your services? We ask, will they have to curtail a program if they have to live within their current revenue? And then we ask, importantly, how does this integrate with the governor's strategic priorities? Grow the economy, promote affordability, protect the vulnerable, and modernize state government. Where is all of that in there? If this is a revenue initiative, how does that fit in? And then we also ask about, obvious opportunities to leverage federal funds. I think right away of Fish and Wildlife. The money that they take in, they use this match to pull down federal funds. So additional fees, will that pull down additional federal revenue that you need? And then we also ask, the obvious question, is there price elasticity in your fees? If you raise the price of a hunting license, you can have fewer hunters. So have you factored that into your fee estimates? So these are a battery of questions that we ask kind of every department that comes to us. And it's really these questions and fitting into the governor's priorities that we use to narrow down from what, the statutory requirements are.
So you narrow down from, say, how many requests from departments?
Yeah.
With that down to how many requests to us?
This year, there would be no request.
And how many requests did you get?
I really don't remember. Like I said.
Just ballpark, like were there 3 or 500?
Like less than 10.
Okay.
Yeah, I
They just
think,
didn't make it through that criteria that you liked.
or they opted out. In other words,
After discussing the criteria.
they either discuss it themselves, they discuss it with us, they discuss it with the governor. Ultimately, it's his decision. So,
Absolutely.
there are many departments that may think twice. And, keeping in mind that revenue is one thing and expenses are another. And, some departments might figure out other ways to do what they're doing to live within their revenue means. So, all of that.
Representative Maslin, do you still have something?
Yeah, I do.
Great. Jump on in.
Nice to see you. I'll go to what I'm thinking. I commend you gentlemen for being articulate and
We're doing our best.
espousing the administration's position. But we know you control the information that comes to the legislature on fee requests. And because you worked in Ways and Means before when we went through fee bills, how hard we work to, as you said, to work on a demonstrable relationship between what we raise as fees and what the outcome is going to be and where the revenue comes from. And so, Commissioner, I find your presentation this afternoon lacks a considerable amount of credibility, because we know from our experiences out and about in various departments here and there that there are deficits being run in a number of very significant programs that aren't being made up by fees because there hasn't been a genuine fee bill for, what, a decade or so, or some long period of time, 6, 8 years, I don't know, enough to make a demonstrable negative impact on the way those programs operate. So that's my comment, thanks for coming in. But I think that there's far more information that should be kind of forthcoming so that we can actually do our job.
Representative Brannigan has something and then Representative.
Okay, well, you and I know each other. We sat together side by side for 6 years, or was it 8 years? I can't really remember. I know it was 6 years. But anyway, so you know how tedious the fee bill can be, but also how informing and really it helps the committee better understand the functions of state government. And so I don't know how it came about, but we have heard from the judiciary and the Secretary of State and Transportation, those three so far. And I don't know how it came about. I don't know if they contacted our committee or if we reached out to them. I don't know, but they came, all three came. And it seemed to me that especially the Secretary of State and Transportation were in bad shape. It had been so long since they'd had a change of any kind in their fees that they were really suffering. And I asked the lady who came from the Secretary of State's office, it isn't Chris Winters anymore, he did it for years, I'm sure you remember that.
Yeah, Lauren Hebert.
Yes, that's right. She told us that it was employee costs that were rising and not really a whole lot to do with the fees. So if the fee themselves were cared for without any rise in employee costs, they could perhaps handle it, although that's not the case. Employees have to be paid for.
Well, could I?
This is what she told the committee.
No, and that's.
She said that it was the employees.
That is, without.
Brannigan, were you done with your question?
Yes.
So I think that probably is true in that case, although I haven't analyzed it specifically. What I can say is I'm aware of the fact that in the department, the agency, the Secretary of State's office had 70 full-time employees in 2017. They have 83 now. So I know that at least in just prepping for this, testimony, I reviewed all the Office of Professional Regulation annual bills. I just wanted to really understand how many fees have changed and what fees specifically in the past 5 years or so. I found that there were 4 new positions created within OPR alone, at least 4 that I saw in the bill language from the past few years. So there clearly is going to be employee salary related pressure created by creating new positions. I'll note that in 2019, there were pretty significant in the last consolidated fee bill in 2019, OPR fees were, there were numerous. There was a large slate of fees that were adjusted. So not that long ago, but there are other changes. There have been IT costs that are pretty significant related to a project in the Secretary of State's office as well. And I think
OPR is a helpful example for us to be using because, there was a lot of transitions they needed to make because of the pandemic. They've done a lot to shift the way they do business because of the nature of our workforce right now. And they've had to incur massive IT costs along with pretty much every department across state government in the last decade, right? And they're a helpful example to us because we have more transparency onto their processes than some other departments that you're not able to offer transparency into their processes for us. And so what you've taken us through statute in a few different ways on this. And so what I'm trying to understand is how we might be able to tighten statute a little bit so that our statutory guidelines that we're offering you are lining up with sort of our expectations of the kind of information we need. So when I look at the detailed fee report that you gave us in November, I remember that you came into joint fiscal about it, but I don't remember what that was.
Right.
And we asked our joint fiscal office to analyze some of that. a lot of the fees are rolled up enough that we can't actually have eyes on what has been inflated recently, whether they're keeping up with inflation, what that looks like. And so we're needing to go to individual departments to ask them for more details. I'm sure part of that is just how your accounting systems work and things are rolling up. But it matters, right, how many people are paying each fee if we're looking at, inflationary pressures on a fee or on a department. And so in order to get that kind of detailed information to really to make the fee report that you gave us actually actionable and useful, I'm wondering from you what you need from us in terms of a more detailed request to you next time, or perhaps soon.
A more detailed request,
In order to get more detailed information.
detailed information.
So I imagine that we would need a more detailed request to get that more detailed information. And the Department of Motor Vehicles is being very cooperative with sort of unfurling some of that rolled up information. But it's hard to sort of be going to each individual department when, as you said, you are the fee department of 2. I'm wondering if you want more staff or if you would rather fees went to the Department of Taxes. That would make things easier for you. I don't know.
Well, so you hear a couple of comments, and I'm thinking about the comments made by my former colleagues, the member from Thetford, and the member from Georgia.
It was quite a committee when you all were on it together. We were looking it up the other day.
And, when we submit a budget every year, the first thing we do when we develop that budget is we look at current law revenue. Current law revenue. And the budget that we submit in January is based on that revenue. So that's the way we think about all departments, whether they're using general fund revenue, whether they're using T-fund revenue, whether they're using special fund revenue. We look at what the revenue is, and we do our absolute best to fit the program and the service they're delivering within that. So we don't think that fee-based departments should be viewed any differently, because there's two sides to every business. There's the revenue side and there's the expense side. So we've done our level best to keep our expenses within our revenues. And we take that seriously. And the guidelines that connect every fee to a program, we take that dead seriously too. So, I would encourage the committee, when you go back and you look at various fees, to think about which specific programs they're offering and whether those programs are being offered correctly. But that's the way we view this. So when we come with no request, what we're saying is that we think we can run those programs within the revenues that we have. And because we don't change fees doesn't mean we don't have, by the way, additional revenue. I can't think of the last time we've changed income taxes in this state, but our income taxes are booming.
Well, they're percentages, not flat numbers.
But-
So they actually adjust in a way that a fee doesn't adjust.
We haven't changed those rates. No, a fee with additional payers, additional fishermen, additional cars to license, also changes. And we've noticed that in many of our departments. So revenues have not been stagnant in all departments. In some they have. There's no question about that. But we look very carefully at the fees that we charge and the programs that they're running before we make fee requests. So that's really guiding our work here. And it has, for 6 years.
Representative Sims.
I certainly appreciate the philosophy of living within our means. I think just building what I think I heard the chair say, to me, I see something, that it's really different when we're talking about fees that do not have inflationary adjustments built in that, especially over this last several years, we are and I hear you saying we start with looking at what the department will bring in. And if for a certain department, that's significantly based upon fees without any inflationary adjustments built in there, it seems to me like a recipe for not allowing our government to fulfill its service and regulatory functions, because you're each year, the amount that the fees bring in is less and less. And that doesn't seem like how most businesses function or even how our tax revenues are structured. And so it's just really hard for me to imagine that we can fulfill our service and regulatory obligations to do good government with less and less money each year. But obviously, if we're not asking for a fee increase, you guys disagree. But
So there's a hypothesis then, is what I'm hearing, that certain functions and services are not being provided because fees have not increased. That's the hypothesis.
More than a hypothesis, sir.
Okay, well, would you share a specific example?
well, it's hard to
I'll make
make
you a
it
list.
transparent.
Because, I mean, we tried to answer the question using financial criteria, which is the business that we're in. So we identified, following the guide provided, the breadcrumbs we were given were, okay, first identify all the fees, then identify all the funds in deficit, then identify the funds that have received support from the general fund, and then identify programs. We interpreted that using those financial criteria are how we would identify the programs where there is a gap. And so it's a fairly short list, but I'll run through it right now. Cannabis Control Board, I don't think we need to talk about that. I know why
we don't need to
they're down there.
run through
Center for Crime Victim Services. I mean,
Sir, we don't need to run through the list. It's okay. I think Representative Beck has a question, and I'm not trying to debate whether or not we have sufficient fees right now, because I know that we are all have our positions that we need to take in this conversation. I'm actually just curious what form you would like a request to take for more detailed information in order to sort of continue this conversation in the future. Representative Beck?
Yeah, I think maybe we're not hearing the what they're saying here. And I think what they're saying here is that the increased economic activity and the increased number of people that are using these services is creating the revenue growth. I don't think anybody's coming in here saying that our fee-based revenues are declining. They're increasing.
well, they are in a few areas,
Yeah.
Representative
Yeah.
Beck. So for instance, the Enhanced 911 Board has a pressure due to people having less landlines, and the Center for Crime Victim Services has both declining federal funds along with declining revenues from convictions and traffic tickets because there are simply fewer of them. So there are places where there are gaps that are identified and where general fund transfers have been made to ensure that these essential services do not provide services. For instance, victims advocates and 911 service. However, there are some structural deficits that are identified that need to be fixed. They're not as clear cut in some of these cases as just raising the amount of the fee, their structures are going to need to be changed, and there are some problems that will need to be worked through. But I'm sorry, but I felt a need to challenge the hypothesis because we have fortunately had ample funds in our coffers to ensure that all services are provided. And as evidenced by the need to make some transfers to cover deficits in funds, that's not sustainable long-term, and we need to address the root structural deficit. However, the cases where we're really seeing those problems, and by we seeing, I mean finance and management seeing a fund in deficit, that's how we see that there is a problem, and services will be curtailed if more revenue doesn't come in. But I think where I challenge is that the services are not being provided. In places they've been, it's been papered over with general fund, and we identify areas that there are problems that we need to fix. But I challenge the assertion that, there's simply less service, just because the fees have not increased. I think I welcome the discussion, and I'm speaking from an accountant standpoint more than a policymaker's. And it's good to have the dialogue, I think, and I welcome the chance to talk.
And so in the interest of solving the long-term structural challenges that we are papering over right now with essentially, massive federal spending, what is the best way from your perspective for us to proceed with, say, gaps such as a transportation fund? Would you like us to be going department by department asking for more detailed requests? Or would you rather deliver us a more detailed report update on the one that you sent us in November?
So what would more details entail? I guess maybe I'm kind of struggling with that. I mean, what type of details are you?
There's some funds that you have sort of, we need to sort of unfurl so we can see the individual fees within them. The number of uses of each one would be really, really helpful.
So unit sales of
Unit sales, yeah.
that on the fee report itself?
Not in I don't have a better technical term than unfurled, like you click down the box on the spreadsheet there. And then if fee information is missing, which I'm sure happens sometimes just because of the way your accounting systems work, marking that and telling us why.
Sure. Well, we could definitely do that. I thought that each one of them had that information.
And then some, a sense of the trends across time, because there are places where we know people are, until the pandemic, fishing licenses, we know are going down. Now they seem to be, but the historic data on usage is really, really, or sales, if you want to call it that, is very helpful to get a sense of the long-term trends. It's one thing with USF, it's another thing with fishing, it's another thing with certain DMV fees.
We could do that.
Great, thank you. I really appreciate it. We are going to wrap up in 1 minute. Are you interested in having the last
Real
word?
quick, cost for me is a pretty slippery concept in the sense that there's total cost, there's variable cost, there's fixed cost, there's a time horizon element to cost. And what I'm hearing from a lot of folks who have come in is that they're meeting day-to-day type of stuff, but they know, for instance, and I'll focus on IT, there's out there a big elephant that they are not creating a sinking fund in. So when you asked or answer the question, are the fees in essence preparing that department to go on and deliver the services, I don't know if you're applying a cramped definition of cost. That's, can I get through this fiscal year? Or will the lights be on in 2.5 years? That's my problem with trying to put some operational or qualitative spin on what you've just said we've delivered to you. Because I think the people who report to us at the department level are thinking more over the curvature of the earth and not just get us through the fiscal year. And I'm not sure whether they and you have the same, if you will, time horizon. Because I'm hearing their IT challenges ongoing and there's no sinking fund for them in the fee-based programs.
Thank you for coming in and having a conversation with us. I appreciate it. And I think we can keep on talking about this. I think the transportation fund in particular is, fairly widely understood to be in something of a situation. And certainly we can paper it over this year, but I think long-term, conversation to have.
Budget. Right. I would suggest for the transportation fund that one thing that this committee actually can do is within your purview is to restore it to keeping its own revenue.
So if we did that, so if we move the purchase and use tax entirely into the transportation fund, are you suggesting that we replace that revenue into the education fund or that we raise property taxes?
I'm suggesting that if you look at.
That's like a straight ad, because I'm like shocked that that's been suggested. So I'm trying to understand what you.
I'm suggesting that if you look at the transportation fund, to say that its fees don't cover its expenses is to forget the fact that you take $20.25 million out of it to send to the general fund. And I don't know what the purchase and use amount is, but it's a third of the purchase and use tax to send to the education fund. So that's why, we were saying earlier, this isn't really just whether fees are appropriate. There are all kinds of things that are being done with those fees that may not be for the betterment of transportation. So I'm merely trying to suggest that there's many forces going on there.
Absolutely.
So.
And we try to, in the midst of all the forces, focus on all the different revenue sources so that we can be buffering ourselves for all of the future forces coming on. And I thank you for joining us. We are going to go to the floor and